The village in it with a map and a plan. No place too tiny for this determined man. Crossing the counties one by one, he'll see in every English corner a bit of history.
Welcome back to Rutland again, everybody. Now behind me you can see what's becoming a familiar river. We've seen that a couple of times already. That is the River Gwash. Now, as well as forming Rutland Water, there were some mills on that river, and they were quite important to the local economy. I'm standing in front of one of the mills, actually. You can't see it at the moment because it's behind the camera, but we're definitely going to talk about it and the rest of this place. It's very interesting. This is Tickencote. Tickencote, Young Goat Shed. Okay then people, Rutland has given us some pretty good stuff to talk about over the past few episodes, and here in Tickencote, that trend is about to continue. This one is really close to the A1. The parish essentially stretches along the A1, which is the former route of Ermine Street, between two of its junctions, Bloody Oaks in the north and Casterton in the south. In the far north of the parish is Tickencote Warren, which was the site of a battle that we mentioned back in Pickworth. Elsewhere in the parish there's a service station, which is worth a mention itself, and a former quarry, believed to be the furthest north location in the UK where a rare plant is found. Tickencote is a small village which is noted for its historic church with its amazing Norman chancel arch. The arch is remarkable, but the whole church is famous. As well as the arch, it also has an unusual chancel roof vault. From 1909 to 1912, the vicar was the Venerable Lonsdale Ragg, who later became the Archdeacon of Gibraltar. The village was formerly the location of Tickencote Hall, which was the seat of the Wingfield family. They carried out much of the church's restorations. John Clare, when working as a lime burner, used to drink at the former Flowerpot Inn, which is now a private house called Flowerpot Cottage. And speaking of literary figures, Tickencote also had its 15 minutes of fame thanks to a book. In 1903, William Lacroix wrote a novel called The Tickencote Treasure. Let's walk. We begin today's walk with a familiar river. That right there is the River Gwash, which we last met in Great Casterton. We already know a bit about this one, so I won't repeat myself. However, Tickencote can claim to have had at least 2 watermills on this stretch of the river. The last time a watermill was in use here was in the mid-1930s. Records show, however, that the Romans might have had a mill of their own. One appears to have been used in Tickencote in the 4th century AD, even though some historians believe that to be dubious. It was on the southern side of the river, whereas the much later mill, which still stands today, is on the northern side. The old mill bears an inscription that reads, Tickencote Mill, erected 1731 by John Wingfield. The Wingfield name is important to this village, and next I'm going to show you where they lived. Tickencote Hall was the home of the Wingfield family for more than 250 years. It was in 1593 that the first man named John Wingfield became associated with Tickencote. He was the first of a succession of 12 of them. That must have been confusing at family gatherings. In 1602, John and Elizabeth Wingfield moved into Tickencote Hall. It was an existing manor house, of which very little is known, but it was probably the one described in an inquisition in 1433 on the death of its former owner, Sir Thomas Danes. The house would go on to become the home of 4 generations of Wingfields until it was demolished to make way for a new hall in 1706. Parts of the old house were incorporated into an outbuilding, which was used for stabling and storage until 1947. The Wingfields kept their home pretty much the same throughout the centuries. Anxious to improve the facilities of the site, however, John Wingfield, the one born in 1763, built the watermill along with an artificial waterway to feed the mill pond. The decline and eventual fall of Tickencote Hall began in 1931. In that year, the John Wingfield who owned it at the time died, and ownership of the hall passed to his nephew. And yes, it was another John Wingfield, although this one was commonly known as Jack. Up until the start of World War I, he let the hall to tenants, and for part of the war it was occupied by Canadian servicemen. By 1945 it was in a sorry state, owing to a lack of maintenance and some vandalism which took place after the Canadians left. Having neither the resources to maintain it nor the desire to live in this huge building, Jack had no alternative but to sell it, but demand for such buildings in the grim post-war years was virtually non-existent. The only available purchaser was a builder who promptly demolished it, ending the Wingfield's connection with Tickencote Hall. The name Tickencote Hall lives on though. The old stable block is now the primary residence here, and it's named Tickencote Hall even though it never was originally. The Wingfields were involved in a colourful legend which goes back to the 15th century. The Tickencote treasure, which is sometimes known as the Upton treasure, is said to be a hoard of silver plate hidden somewhere in Tickencote at the time of the Wars of the Roses. Efforts to locate the treasure, which included a search by Lieutenant Colonel J.M. Wingfield in the early 20th century, have so far been unsuccessful. However, an adventure story exists that's loosely based on this legend. Written by William Lacroix, it's literally called The Tickencote Treasure. Published in 1903, the novel is a work of adventure fiction, and it helps springboard Lacroix's career as a leading author of popular thrillers. The Tickencote Treasure is a story of piracy, mystery, and suspense on the high seas. In the book, a struggling doctor, Paul Pickering, gets the chance of a lifetime when an old sea captain recruits him for a voyage to Africa. Unsure at first, Pickering accepts his offer, embarking on a journey that brings him to the coast of Algeria. After several uneventful days at sea, the crew is surprised to discover a strange ship floating towards them. Although it resembles an old Elizabethan vessel, the hull looks relatively new. Thinking it abandoned, the group of sailors board the phantom ship to find it hermetically sealed. Hoping for treasure, they go below deck to find a strange old man instead. As the story unfolds, an atmosphere of mystery and ancient legend threaten to overwhelm Pickering and his comrades. Now, of course, whatever you want to call it, Tickencote Hall is off limits to us. There is a little track which is, let me just show you, up here. This is leaving the village to the sort of north-ish. You can see there's a footpath up there. Now that leads across part of the hall's parkland, and it crosses the sort of entrance drive. Now, obviously, you're allowed to walk on that path, but you're not allowed on the track. So I'm not about to go down there and see what I can capture from there, to be honest with you. Instead, I'm going to go into the church, which you can see the lit gate of on the left of shot. Let's have a look at that. The Wingfields had a big say in the upkeep of Tickencote's church. This is St Peter's, the exterior of which mostly dates from a major rebuild by Eliza Wingfield in 1792. The nave was demolished and rebuilt, and the work was carried out by Samuel Pepys Cockerell. Stepping inside St Peter's, your eye is drawn to its most impressive feature, its splendid Norman arch. The arch was built between 1130 and 1150 and features 6 bands of intricate carvings, including some fantastic beakheads, creatures and grotesques. The arch has become distorted due to the weight of the 7-foot thick wall above it. The church's nave is built in the same area as the original Norman church, and the huge Norman arch may have been the original entrance. It's now been enclosed within the new church. During the rebuild, the sexpartile vaulted ceiling of the chancel was saved and rebuilt piece by piece. The vaulting is very unusual. Its style is not only incredibly rare, but maybe the earliest example in Britain. Also in the chancel is a 14th century wooden effigy of a knight. It's said to be Sir Roland de Danes, who fought in France and was knighted at Carcassonne in 1355. As for the font, that's a wonderful example of Romanesque design dating back to the 13th century. Well, I have to admit, I'm really pleased that this church was open, because That arch is absolutely fantastic. I'm stood in the chancel here. I'm on the other side of the arch, and it doesn't look anywhere near as good from this side, does it? But at least from this side, you can see the barrel vaulted ceiling. Look at this. That's absolutely amazing as well, isn't it? And something else that I noticed too when I walked in here, apart from the arch and the ceiling, would be at the back, there's a bell. Now, there's a sign atop it. Says, this ancient pre-Reformation bell, being cracked, was replaced by a new one by Taylor & Co, Loughborough, 1934. We know a bit about them already, don't we? From various churches across the country. So there you go. There's the bell at the back of the church. But I tell you, if you come in here, the bell is a good thing to have a look at, but that arch is where it's at, isn't it? Fabulous. Now we're on the A1 for a short way. This is part of the Stamford bypass, which opened in 1960. Oddly, for 11 years, the bypass terminated with a roundabout here at Tickencote, where the A1 met the B1081. The most notable landmark on the A1 at Tickencote is Bloody Oak Services. Tickencote has had a service area since the 1960s, when a pair of petrol stations were opened on either side of the bypass. The southbound side was abandoned and later demolished. The northbound filling station was abandoned at some point during the early 1980s. Despite plans to build a new one during the late 80s and early 90s, nothing was built until 1996, when OK Diner built a branch here. Throughout the 2000s, the site included a Texaco's petrol station, and that later became a jet garage in 2011. MRH took over in 2014, Esso followed in 2016, and MFG took up the reins in 2018. MFG would rebrand the shop to Alondis in 2020. MFG sold the forecourt in 2023 to Platinum Retail, and they rebranded the forecourt to BP, with the shop becoming a spa store. Throughout all of this time though, the services has retained the same name, Bloody Oaks. Okay, so to get back into Tickencote from here, we need to follow a footpath which is directly opposite Bloody Oak Services. This will take us back through a few more residential bits and bobs and back to Mill Lane. Lovely little place this, isn't it? Absolutely gorgeous. And how about that chancel arch in the church, eh? Let's make our way back to the car. We're heading north here up the A1 to the former Bloody Oaks Quarry. It's now a nature reserve and a 3.2 acre site of special scientific interest, owned and managed by the Leicestershire and Rutland Wildlife Trust. The site has species-rich grassland on Jurassic limestone. The dominant grasses are tallgrass and upright brome. Flora within the reserve include rock rose, salad burnet, yellow wort and autumn gentian. It's believed that the Bloody Oaks is the furthest location north anywhere in the UK that has the rare chalk milkwort flower. The site is open to the public, so you can have a look around for it yourself. None of that explains the name though. To do that, we have to go back to the Pickworth episode. There you'll recall we mentioned how a battle resulted in the depopulation of the medieval village. So if you come off at the next junction up the A1, you'll find this rather nondescript clump of trees. It might look a bit like nothing, but to be honest with you, most clumps of trees do, don't they? This has a tale to tell by way of its name, Bloody Oaks. This is Bloody Oaks Quarry, the same as the service station just down the A1 there, Bloody Oaks Service Station. And this leads us to a battle, which we have mentioned before on TVI, the Battle of Losecoat Field, which put the blood in Bloody Oaks. The Battle of Losecoat Field, also known as the Battle of Empingham, was fought on the 12th of March 1470 during the Wars of the Roses. The battle secured the defeat of the poorly organised Welsh uprising against King Edward IV. Almost a year earlier, in 1469, an army loyal to Edward was defeated at the Battle of Edgecote by Richard Neville, the 16th Earl of Warwick. Edward himself was subsequently captured in Olney, Buckinghamshire. However, with the help and support of his brother, the Duke of Gloucester, he regained power. By March 1470, Warwick found himself in a similar position to the one he'd been in before the Battle of Edgecote. He was unable to exercise any control over or influence any of Edward's policies. Warwick wanted to place George, the Duke of Clarence, on the throne so that he could regain his influence. To do this, he needed support from the former supporters of the defeated House of Lancaster. He called upon Sir Robert Wells to gather troops at his base in Lincolnshire, ready for a show of arms against the king. The unrest in Lincolnshire prompted the king to act, and he started to gather men for his own army in response. With the encouragement of Warwick and Clarence, Wells set himself up as a great captain of the people of Lincolnshire, sending summons requesting every able man to join him in resisting the king. The rebels soon numbered 100,000, having recruited many men from nearby counties. Wells would then receive a letter from the king telling him to disband the rebel army, or his father, Lord Wells, would be executed. Edward's scouts informed him that the rebel army was some 5 miles from Stamford, prepared for battle beside the Great North Road at Tickencote Warren. This prompted the king to position his men in battle line to the north of Wells's army, and then in the space separating the two forces, he had Lord Wells executed in sight of both. That was the catalyst for the battle to begin. The rebels advanced with cries of Warwick and Clarence, but they didn't get very far. A single barrage of cannonballs was fired, and then Edward's men charged towards the enemy. Before the leaders of this attack could even come to blows with the rebel front line, the battle was over. The rebels chose to flee, a much safer option than trying to face the king's highly trained men. Sir Robert Wells was captured during the rout and was executed a week later after confessing treason. Warwick and Clarence were forced to flee the country. So how did the battle get its name? Well, according to legend, many of Wells's men were wearing jackets displaying the livery of Warwick and Clarence. When the rout began, many of the rebels discarded these garments because they didn't want to be caught wearing something that would identify them. Thus the battle was called Losecoat. And that's it, folks. We are done with Tickencote, and what a fabulous little place this is. Tomorrow, we're off to the largest one we've met so far in Rutland. Tomorrow's village is a place that sits on the shores of Rutland Water. Get your bikinis and beach towels out, you're going to need them. Now, just before I go, remember, this video is part of a huge project to visit every civil parish in England. That's more than 10,000. These routes are pre-planned, and due to time constraints, I can't cover every detail or walk down every street. Please don't complain if this video missed something out. I pronounce names how I choose to. I am very aware that local dialect may vary, and I don't take kindly to criticism about this. You've been warned. It's impossible to know everything too. If this video was terrible, make your own. If you're a regular watcher of The Village Idiot, you're not the only one. If you've got a small business, why not use my videos to advertise it? Leave a comment below if you're interested. And finally, thanks for watching this episode, everybody. Give us a like and a subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode, and share it with your friends and relatives. It all helps to keep this mission going. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as The Village Idiot, and I'm out.